Hey guys, Ruben Lara here, and today we're going to talk about how to keep seeing the big picture when painting digitally. You know, one of the pitfalls of painting digitally is that because we can zoom in, it's easy to lose a sense of scale and looseness in your piece. And it's something that really is inherent in traditional artwork, whether you're drawing on a piece of paper or painting on a canvas. You always have a sense of the whole. You can step back, you can see the whole thing at all times. But because of screen sizes, right? Our screen can only get so big. Maybe we're painting on an iPad even. We're not always thinking about the big picture precisely because we do need to zoom in and out in order to work on details. So I want to show you what I like to do to keep reminding me not to go too tight, to keep my brushes loose and large. Now this whole painting took me about an hour and 20 minutes and I've recorded a time lapse of it. I'm just going to scrub through pieces of it to highlight some tips and techniques from this piece. All right, I'm going to come up to about the 20-minute mark. And really, it's something I should have done earlier, and sometimes I do forget. But at some point, I find myself wondering, what does this piece look like from far away? So this technique works both in Clip Studio and Photoshop. I'll just go ahead and play it here. And if you go under Window, in Clip Studio, at least under Workspace, or sorry, Canvas, and just click New Window, you basically get a duplicate pane where you can see your file updating in real time. And here I'm just going through and resetting my workspace. But now you can see that as I'm painting in the larger panel here, my small panel is constantly updating. And this is just giving me a good sense of what these big shapes are looking like from a distance. So important because I really want to stay loose and chunky and make sure my values are there, make sure my planes are there and my silhouettes as I'm working. So this really helps me maintain that sense of perspective in terms of looking at the big picture and just making sure things are readable. It also helps me when I'm comparing against my source material to see if the shapes are true and if it's going in the direction that I really want it to go in. I'm also able to see my edge quality. So, as I'm painting around these vignettes, I really want to just keep reminding myself, how loose this is looking. A lot of times you're zooming in and you feel like you're painting loose. But as soon as you pop out a couple clicks, it is quite tight. So having this secondary window is just really super valuable for me to keep making sure that I'm seeing the painting as a whole, or at least from a distance. There's a couple other things I want to point out here is that just in terms of my own personal technique, again, there's lots of ways to paint digitally for sure. But I try to paint in as few layers as possible. You can see here that I just have my canvas. This folder 2 is really nothing inside there, and layer 1 is not doing anything either. But I basically have my canvas, my paint, and my pencil lines. And for the whole first, maybe 20 minutes or so, I'm painting under the pencil because that's just giving me the ability to not destroy the form. I'm just thinking about color and value. I'm not thinking about ruining my drawing. And just limiting the amount of decisions I have to make at the outset. Then about halfway through, you can see that I've done this here. I'll go ahead and about right here. So I'll make a duplicate of my lines so I have a copy for it later. And I'm now merging my line work and my painting and then turning off my lines. And from this point forward, I'm painting on top of my pencil work. Now in the final, there's always going to be a little pencil work that shows. I shouldn't say always. Just my personal preference. I do like some of that pencil work to show. But the nice thing is we're getting this great layered look now because I'm painting and almost, just kind of getting rid of that line work, layering paint over it, leaving pencil structure where I need it or where I want it. And I just feel like it gives it a nice, rich, layered look to at some point just start painting over my pencil work. And even, just leaving little pieces of it here and there, I think adds a little bit of structure, of course, depending on the style. The other thing I want to point out is that I'm using a gamut mask. If you're not familiar with that, I'll be doing a tutorial on that soon. But it basically limits the saturations within my color palette, so I'm not using competing saturations. And I find, especially if I'm working from a black and white picture, the gamut mask is giving me the colors that I need to use. I'm not, if I'm predominantly in a blue zone, I'm not oversaturating my reds. It just helps me keep everything in balance. At the beginning, I would say for about 80% of the piece, I'm usually finding that my colors are pretty muted, and that's okay. They're in balance. And then afterwards, maybe toward the end, I'll go ahead and throw a hue saturation layer on top, and that will just punch everything up just a little bit. You can kind of see that difference there. But they're being saturated together, and that is the important thing, is that balance of saturations remain constant as you saturate everything up together. Next, I just want to point out that I'm only using about 3 brushes in this whole thing. I'm using the flat ribbon, which is a modified version of a standard Clip Studio brush that I've made, just to kind of get these big, chunky dry brushy strokes. And then the oil paint flat brush is a modified version of Clip Studio's oil paint brush, along with a canvas texture. And I think that canvas texture really goes a long way to just helping our brain feel that this is a traditional piece, right? So it's just adding a little of that canvas underneath. And of course I'm painting on top of a canvas. So I find that those 2 clues together go a long way for the traditional look that I'm looking for. So I'm using flat ribbon, oil paint flat brush with the texture, and also my sculpt brush. And I've also added a texture to that sculpt brush too. And I just find that sculpt brush, I just have such a good time using it. You can really see it in practice here in the face. At the beginning, I'll just lay in a bunch of colors, almost like I'm, doing not a paint by number, but just laying in flat color very opaquely and not really worrying about blending too much. But coming in at some point with my sculpt brush, let me see if I can find it here. There we go. You can see I've selected the sculpt brush there, and I'll just go ahead and play this forward. And it really just starts to blend these colors together, and it's buttery, it's creamy, depending on what direction you're coming into the color, it'll drag one color into the other and vice versa. And I just find that I have a lot of really beautiful interactions with color that I would not have probably done if I was blending these things in the more traditional digital approach with opacities. So yeah, that's the sculpt brush. I love it. You can get the sculpt brush, the oil paint flat brush textured, as well as the flat ribbon in my sculpt brush set on gumroad.com. And lastly, I just want to point out that at the end, I have brought in my Gesso Ground Textures, which you can also find on gumroad.com. So what this is basically a series of Photoshop setups that you can use in Photoshop or in Clip Studio with just some traditional looking gesso swirl patterns. And you drag those into Clip Studio, copy and paste them into your document, and you get this real beautiful, subtle, gesso ground texture on your board. So I've done that there. I've dropped it down to 20-30%, and now I'm taking a brush on a mask and just removing it from areas where the texture is either distracting or doesn't make a lot of sense. Usually it's going to be areas, if I'm thinking traditionally, where I'm there's more paint, right? We're assuming we've kind of created this swirl pattern with gesso on the board before painting, and then we apply this paint over the top. So it just gives one more layer of interest. And I also find that oftentimes these swirl patterns can even highlight shapes of the form and figures, especially like here in the face. I've kind of moved it around. They're large enough where you can move around and find just the right spot for these patterns. And I really like what's happening here in the face and right here in the corners, just really drawing the attention to this nice silhouette. So yeah, those are available also on Gumroad, Gesso Ground Textures. Now, if you're interested in the full resolution Clip Studio file, as well as a real-time screen recording of this painting, again, it's about 1 hour and 20 minutes. If you're interested in taking a look at my process and pulling out what you like and discarding what you don't, this is available as part of ArtBag 03. All right, well, I hope that was helpful. Keep on painting and have fun.